There is a man who, on the outside, is perfectly normal, but at night he turns into a dark monster. Richard Cottingham was an ordinary family man, but no one noticed his prey in the lethal shadows that shrouded the city in a terrible silence. The more he killed, the more he disappeared. He was always one step ahead. Sometimes a killer not only knocks on the door of a room, but also leaves unrest in the dark corners of a city. A monster roamed the streets of New York and New Jersey. A killer destroying the bodies of his victims while disappearing into his own dark world. Who was he really? Is he just a family man or a murderer? And one day, those silent shadows would reappear in a fire just when we thought it was all over. 1979, Manhattan. Burnt bodies in a hotel room. Richard Cottingham has finally lost his dark mask. But what's left? A question, a man, a city, and a killer's terrible past. How many secrets does he still hold? Chapter 1. Dark Hotel Rooms. Year 1967 to 1970, New York and New Jersey, USA. In the late 1960s, a dark story began to take shape in New York and New Jersey. Under the neon lights of the cities, in the shadows no one noticed, a silent killer was on the hunt. Richard Cottingham was a seemingly normal family man, leading an ordinary life on the outside. However, his real world began in hotel rooms at midnight. He began his first murders in 1967, and his victims were mostly women. The victims were usually found in the rooms of hotels in Manhattan. Police were shocked to find that the bodies had been brutally assaulted and some had been mutilated. But the killer's professionalism and caution meant that he left few traces. As the murders continued to mount, residents' fears grew. No one knew it yet, but Richard Cottingham, soon to be dubbed the Torso Killer, was leaving his horrifying legacy in the cities. While authorities desperately searched for clues to identify this mysterious killer, Cottingham continued to stalk his prey, silent and cold-blooded. Chapter 2. Fire, Knife and Silence. Year 1970 to 1974, New York and New Jersey, USA. In the early 1970s, murders were becoming more frequent. With each new body the police found, they were confronted with the same nightmare. Burnt bodies, severed limbs, and almost always a thorough cleaning. The killer left behind no fingerprints, no hair, no blood evidence. He was virtually invisible. Richard Cottingham usually chose his victims among women he saw alone on the street or in bars. He would persuade them and take them to hotels, then torture, rape, and murder them. Some victims' bodies were burned beyond recognition, others were left mutilated. This brutality finally made him identifiable in police files as the Torso Killer. The media covered these murders with extensive coverage, and a wave of fear grew among the public. Walking alone at night on the busy streets of Manhattan was now an act of courage. Women became suspicious of even the smile of a stranger. A special unit was set up within the police force. This unit was conducting regular interviews with the hotel staff, analyzing the crime scene more frequently and working on possible connections. But the killer was a master at evading capture. Those who knew him described Cottingham as polite, quiet, well-dressed. But at night, he was a completely different man. As the murders continued, the police were forced by public pressure to look for more clues. But darkness still hung over the city, and Cottingham had not yet begun his bloodiest games. Chapter 3. Walls of Screams. Year 1975 to 1980, New York and New Jersey, USA. As the murders escalated, Richard Cottingham became even more ruthless. By 1979, the similarities between the murders were so clear that all the detectives knew they were looking for the same person. But they still didn't have a name. In December 1979, a fire in a Manhattan hotel changed everything. When the fire was extinguished, the charred bodies of 2 women were found inside. The bodies were headless and limbless. But the room had been booked in the name of Cottingham. This was the first serious trace. Police soon took Cottingham into custody. Detained, Cottingham remained silent at first, but over time he began to unravel. In 1980, he was put on trial. Thanks to forensic techniques, which were quite rare at the time, some of the victims' evidence was linked to Cottingham. During the trials, Cottingham's cold-blooded and emotionless demeanor terrified everyone in the courtroom. Prosecutors were able to present enough evidence for 5 murders. Cottingham was convicted of murdering 5 women in 1980 and sentenced to life imprisonment. Years later, however, confessions and newly discovered evidence would reveal that the total number of victims was 11, perhaps even more. Nevertheless, with Cottingham's imprisonment in 1980, the long-standing horror in the New York and New Jersey regions came to an end. The city breathed a sigh of relief, but left behind shattered lives and scars that will never be erased. Chapter 4. When Silent Walls Speak. Year 2000s and later, USA. Years after Richard Cottingham's conviction, the shadow of his crimes lingered. In the early 2000s, thanks to advances in DNA technology, cold case files began to be re-examined. This was the beginning of a new era for the Cottingham case. Police reopened some of the previously unsolved murder files. In 2009, Cottingham was found guilty of 5 previous murders and put on trial again. This time, there were confessions. In addition to the murders he was on trial for, Cottingham admitted to committing at least 6 other murders over the years. The torso killer was back in the media spotlight, this time as the face of an era in which unfinished scores from the past were settled. Relatives of the victims felt that justice had been served, albeit years later. But these confessions also raised the possibility that Cottingham may have had many more victims than previously thought. In the 2000s and 20s, Cottingham was still alive and continued to provide new information from time to time. Investigative journalists have made this dark dossier even more visible through documentaries, podcasts, and books. Cottingham's confessions have also played an important role in solving other cold cases. The murders echoed in the hearts of New Jersey and New York for years, and Richard Cottingham is still remembered as one of history's most ruthless and complex serial killers. Each year he spent in prison could not silence the echoes of the horror he left behind. Chapter 5. The Face Behind the Darkness. Year, present day, USA. Richard Cottingham is an old man now, but the shadow of his crimes still lingers after decades. He confessed to many murders during his years in prison, but it is still not known exactly how many people he killed. Some sources put the number at over 100. In recent years, the investigation into Cottingham has deepened. Thanks in particular to the work of Detective Robert Anzelotti, Cottingham has taken responsibility for new murders that had not been linked in the past. In 2021, he pleaded guilty again to the deaths of 3 women that had remained unsolved for years. In the process, the families of the victims began to face the truth, albeit years later. For some, it was justice served. For others, it meant reopening wounds. Cottingham's story showed how complex the history of crime can be, not only in terms of atrocities, but also in terms of law, forensic science, and human psychology. Today, Cottingham is held in a high-security prison in New Jersey. He has become a quiet man, with limited contact with the outside world. But the terrible legacy he left behind is still alive. In police reports, documentaries, newspapers, and above all, in the stories of his victims. Known as the Torso Killer, Richard Cottingham will forever be remembered as one of America's darkest serial killers. His story will be remembered as a darkness from which not only the past but also the future must learn lessons.